So what if the exact same biological explosion happening in your brain when you swipe right on a dating app is actually the precise chemical cascade that allowed Albert Einstein to discover relativity?
Right, which sounds completely counterintuitive when you first hear it.
Totally. I mean, we usually put romance in one bucket,
Yeah.
candlelight, poetry, maybe a dramatically timed rainstorm.
Yeah, I'm in the movie stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we put the raw analytical brilliance of human genius in this completely different, cold, calculating bucket.
Well, we treat them as fundamentally separate domains of the human experience. Like, we view romantic love as this deeply personal, almost mystical state of being,
Right.
while we view intellectual pursuit or artistic creation as a rigorous, disciplined function of the higher mind.
But the walls we've built between human emotion and human intellect are, well, they're completely artificial. And welcome to today's deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. So for you listening, our mission today is to explore this incredibly rich paper by anthropologist P Linstroth. It's titled Reflections on Valentine's Day.
And Linstroth essentially smashes together the hard physical geography of neuroscience with a sweeping romance of poetry, art, and philosophy.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because we aren't just looking at romantic love today. The sources basically argue that the biological engine of a crush is actually the biological engine of human genius.
Yeah, and to really understand how that engine operates, we have to start at the absolute baseline of the human physical experience.
The nuts and bolts.
Exactly. Before we get anywhere near the poetry and the philosophy, we have to look at the raw chemicals.
Right, the stuff literally floating around in our heads.
We need to understand how the biological foundation of a standard romantic interaction translates into what Linstroth calls higher love.
Higher love.
Yeah, the kind of profound devotion that drives, monumental human achievement.
So the raw materials. Linstroth points to research from Catherine J. Wu at Harvard University, and she breaks the human love process down into 3 distinct mechanical stages.
She does. First, there's the lust stage.
Which sounds very basic.
It is, yeah. This is your baseline evolutionary drive. It's fueled primarily by the release of testosterone and estrogen.
So it's the blunt force starter motor of human reproduction.
That's a great way to put it. But if that initial spark catches, you move into the second phase, which is attraction.
And this is where the chemistry becomes incredibly potent, right? Like, this is the rush.
Oh, absolutely. During the attraction phase, your brain just gets flooded with dopamine and norepinephrine.
Okay, remind us what those do exactly.
So dopamine is your primary reward and motivation chemical. It's what creates that intense craving. And then norepinephrine gives you a massive jolt of energy and alertness.
Wow, okay.
And simultaneously, your levels of serotonin actually drop.
Which is fascinating to me, because serotonin is normally the chemical that makes you feel calm and satiated, right?
Right. It's the mood stabilizer.
So when it plummets, you basically lose your chill.
You completely lose it, yeah.
For anyone listening, think about the last time you hyper-fixated on something, maybe a new video game or a sudden obsession with baking bread or a brand new crush.
You forget to eat, you can't sleep.
Exactly. You are literally vibrating with energy. That is your dropping serotonin, creating this almost obsessive-compulsive loop, while the dopamine just keeps you hooked.
It's a highly focused, high-energy state, and it's designed to hijack your attention and point it entirely at one specific target.
And finally, I guess if your nervous system actually survives that chemical storm, you reach the 3rd stage.
Right, long-term attachment.
And this one is governed by the release of oxytocin and vasopressin.
Yeah, these are the bonding chemicals. They're the ones that lower your defenses, reduce fear, and make you feel deeply secure and connected over the long haul.
Now, here is where the research just flips everything on its head for me.
It really does.
These exact same neural chemicals, like the dopamine craving, the serotonin obsession, the oxytocin bonding, they are the identical tools utilized by artists, theoretical physicists, and mathematicians for creation.
Identical. Linstroth points to works of absolute genius. We're talking Mozart's Requiem, Plato's Republic, Darwin's On the Origin of Species, Tolstoy's War and Peace.
The heavy hitters.
Right. And the dedication required to produce these works wasn't just, intellectual discipline.
Right.
Biologically, it was identical to profound romantic love.
So it completely reframes how we think about a master's dedication to their craft.
Exactly. They aren't just sitting at a desk forcing themselves to work. They are in the grip of a biochemical attachment.
Okay, here is where I have to push back a little, or at least introduce an analogy to kind of test this out.
Sure, let's hear it.
I can totally see how the attraction phase of a romantic crush feels identical to the flow state of starting a new creative project. You lose track of time, you're buzzing with ideas.
Yeah, that initial rush.
But are we really saying that biologically, reacting to a beautiful painting or a complex math problem is the exact same chemical cascade as reacting to a Tinder match?
At a foundational neural level, yes.
Wait, really? Is looking at a screen biologically equivalent to conceptualizing the Sistine Chapel?
What's fascinating here is that the brain's reward hardware doesn't necessarily distinguish between the source of the profound passion.
It just reacts.
Right. And to understand why, we have to look at the underlying mechanisms, specifically through the work of neuropsychologist Dalia Zadel at UCLA, which Linstroth includes in his analysis.
Okay, what did she find?
Zadel maps out exactly what happens in the brain during the artistic process, and she isolates structures like the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA, and the amygdala.
Okay, let's break those down for the listener. What are the VTA and the amygdala actually doing in this scenario?
Think of the ventral tegmental area as the brain's central dopamine factory and, like, internal cheerleader.
Internal cheerleader,
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, it sits deep down in the primitive part of your brainstem. Its entire job is to pump out dopamine to say, yes, this is highly rewarding, keep doing this.
Okay, and the amygdala.
Your amygdala acts as the brain's emotional highlighter. It tags certain experiences, memories, or stimuli as incredibly significant.
So they are working in tandem then?
Precisely. And the crucial takeaway from Zadel's research is that these regions aren't just romance centers.
Right, that's just a pop science myth.
Exactly. They are generalized motivation and reward systems. Their job is to validate any intense passion.
So the VTA doesn't inherently know if you were gazing at the love of your life, or if you're a physicist who just cracked an equation explaining the fabric of the universe.
It has no idea. It just knows this stimulus is deeply, profoundly essential to me, and it hits the big red chemical button, flooding your brain with dopamine.
Wow. So the chemical reward for intellectual discovery is physically the same as the reward for finding a mate.
The brain just identifies what matters to you and fires up the machinery.
But, knowing how the VTA and the amygdala operate naturally leads us to ask where else this is happening in the physical geography of the brain.
Especially when we start talking about artistic genius.
Right. Like, does the physical shape or wiring of someone's brain actually dictate their talent?
Well, you're touching on the field of neuroaesthetics now.
Neuroaesthetic.
Yeah, it's this fascinating area of research that attempts to map human creativity and our ability to appreciate beauty directly onto the physical structures of the brain.
The search for the anatomy of genius.
Exactly.
And the sources break down this anatomy in a really specific way. I mean, we've all heard the pop psychology about being left-brained or right-brained.
Right, which is usually oversimplified.
But Linstroth points out the actual physical truth to the brain's division of labor. Like, language processing is largely tethered to the left hemisphere,
Yes.
but musical and visual arts light up the right hemisphere. When researchers look at people creating or appreciating pictorial artwork, like a painting or a sculpture, very specific regions activate in tandem.
Yeah, the bilateral occipital gyri, the bilateral fusiform gyri, and the caudate nucleus.
Which, that sounds like a super dense list of anatomy.
It is a mouthful, but let's look at what that symphony of brain regions is actually doing.
Please do.
So your occipital gyri are located at the very back of your head. They are processing the raw visual data, the lines, the light, the colors of the painting.
Just the basic input.
Right. Then they send that data forward to the fusiform gyri, which act as a pattern recognition engine.
Okay, so it's making sense of it.
Exactly. The fusiform gyrus is trying to find meaning, recognizable shapes or faces hidden in those colors.
So it's trying to decode the visual input.
Spot on. And when it finally clicks, when the brain recognizes the beauty or the profound pattern in the art, it sends a signal straight to the caudate nucleus.
And where does that fit in?
The caudate nucleus is a massive feedback loop connected to that dopamine system we discussed earlier.
Oh, wow. So art isn't just one magic spark in one place.
Not at all. It's a mechanical process. Your eyes gather the light, your pattern engine decodes the meaning, and your reward center floods you with pleasure for solving the visual puzzle.
It's an anatomical chain reaction.
Yeah.
But then the research in Linstroth's paper takes a bit of a controversial turn.
Yeah, it dives into some debated territory.
The paper brings up Robert Bilder, another neuropsychologist at UCLA. And Builder has a theory that people with exceptional artistic abilities may actually have an enlarged amygdala.
Literally, they possess physically larger emotional processing centers in their heads.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me, because I kind of have to challenge this sort of biological determinism.
It's a fair challenge.
Right. Because it's true. If world-changing artistic genius comes down to just having a physically bulkier piece of tissue in your brain, doesn't that rob the magic from art?
You're asking if artistic genius is just an anatomical quirk.
Exactly. Like, is it no different than being born 7 feet tall so you can play basketball?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a highly debated topic. And Linstroth's paper suggests we cannot relegate true accomplishments at the highest cognitive levels merely to chemicals and tissue mass.
Right. That feels too reductionist.
It is. If we look closely at the mechanics, the biological determinism argument falls short because it confuses the capacity with the creation.
How do you mean? What's the difference there?
Think of it like a world-class instrument. The biological material, the enlarged amygdala, the hyperconnected occipital gyri, the efficient dopamine pathways, that is simply the instrument.
Okay.
It's a beautifully crafted, highly resonant Stradivarius violin. But the human execution, the choices, the lived experience, the suffering, and the joy poured into the work, that is the music.
Oh, I love that. You can hand a Stradivarius to someone, but that doesn't mean they will automatically play a masterpiece.
Exactly. Biology simply sets the stage and provides the tools. An enlarged amygdala doesn't write War and Peace.
Right. Tolstoy did.
The individual's conscious, struggling interaction with their world does that.
I really like that. The biology is the instrument, but the human execution is the music. It gives the agency back to the artist.
It really does.
Which leads to a massive question for me. If our brain chemistry, the dopamine, the serotonin, the VTA, is virtually identical to the hardware inside other primates, why aren't chimpanzees writing sonnets?
That's $1 million question.
What is the biological missing link between having the capacity for passion and actually painting the Sistine Chapel?
This is where we have to look at how humans uniquely construct the meaning of love and passion, and we do that largely through culture and narrative.
Okay, culture and narrative.
Yeah, anthropologist Andrew Beattie points out that human emotions are entirely unique in the animal kingdom because they are narratively constructed.
Narratively constructed, so we tell stories about them.
Exactly. We use linguistic expressions, social roles, and complex storytelling to frame what we feel.
While other animals just feel it.
Right. Other species feel basic attachment, fear, or lust, but they don't have the musical, dramatic, or fictional complexity that we do.
Let me try an original analogy here just to make sure I'm tracking.
Go for it.
It sounds like biology provides the raw alphabet, the ABCs of hormones and brain structures. But humans are the only species that take that alphabet and write poetry.
That's a great way to look at it.
We invent tragedies, we invent romantic comedies, we invent the concept of soulmates.
Yes.
But my question is, how does this cultural narrative layer actually interact with the brain? Like, does the story we tell ourselves physically change our lived experience of those base chemicals?
Yes, it profoundly alters the mechanism of how we experience the chemistry.
Really? Just by telling a story?
By narrating our emotions, we achieve what Beattie calls a subjective unity. Humans don't just feel love. We have a prefrontal cortex.
The logical part behind the forehead.
Right, the logical storytelling part of the brain right behind your forehead. And that allows us to observe ourselves feeling love. We are conscious of our own emotional state.
We can actually analyze our own dopamine rush while it's happening.
Exactly. And because the prefrontal cortex communicates directly with the reward systems like the VTA, we can actually hack our own biology.
Hack it.
We can detach the chemical reaction from a direct physical stimulus, like a mate standing right in front of us, and instead direct that profound devotion toward abstract concepts.
Wow.
The story we tell ourselves literally regulates the dopamine release. This is why a human being can feel an immense chemical higher love for an abstract concept like humanity or the muse or an invisible deity.
The narrative layer allows us to point our biological devotion at the abstract.
Exactly.
And I guess that narrative capacity allows us to explore extremes of love that completely defy biological logic.
Yes, and Linstroth brings in the philosophical angle with C.S. Lewis to illustrate this.
Oh, C.S. Lewis, okay.
In his book, The Problem of Pain, Lewis discusses the concept of divine love. He describes it as a love that gives everything but needs absolutely nothing in return.
Bottomlessly selfless.
Right. Now, from a purely evolutionary biological standpoint, a completely selfless act that offers no reciprocal survival benefit makes zero sense.
Yeah, none at all. The dopamine hit is supposed to be a reward to keep you surviving and procreating. Giving everything away for nothing breaks the biological rules.
It breaks the rules of basic survival completely. But through complex narrative and spiritual frameworks, humans can construct and genuinely experience this divine love.
Which is wild when you think about the chemicals behind it.
What's fascinating is how the physical brain processes that divine narrative. Which brings us to the work of cognitive anthropologist Harvey Whitehouse.
What does Whitehouse say about it?
Whitehouse explains that religious experiences, which are essentially frameworks for experiencing divine love, are divergent. They take drastically different forms, and they trigger entirely different physical mechanisms in the body.
Walk us through how that works. Like, why does the brain react differently depending on the religious framework?
So Whitehouse outlines two main modes of religious experience. The first is quiet, text-based, and repetitive. Think of sitting in a quiet room, reading the Bible, or meditating on a scripture every day.
Very peaceful.
Right. Mechanically, this relies on your semantic memory, your brain's ability to store facts and concepts over the long term.
And what chemicals are at play there?
It provides a slow, steady, comforting drip of serotonin and oxytocin. It builds a quiet, structural understanding of love.
Like a slow run of connection.
Precisely. But then you have the second mode, which is heavily imagistic, shocking, and high arousal.
Okay, that sounds intense.
It is. Whitehouse gives the example of visceral physical rituals, like some devotees in the Philippines who carry heavy crosses or endure physical penance during Easter.
Wow, that is the complete opposite of quietly reading a book.
It is, and it triggers a completely different biological pathway. Extreme physical exertion and pain trigger the brain's threat responses.
It's a fight or flight mode.
Yeah, your body releases a massive flood of adrenaline and endorphins, your natural painkillers.
Right.
When a group of people endures that intense physiological spike together, the brain utilizes episodic memory, those flashbulb memories of intense events, and releases massive spikes of oxytocin to bond the survivors.
So it's the exact same conceptual goal devotion, reverence, divine love.
Yes.
But the cultural narrative dictates whether you wire your brain for it using the slow, calm, semantic memory of reading or the high adrenaline, endorphin-laced episodic memory of carrying a cross.
Both pathways utilize the biological alphabet to arrive at the exact same conceptual poetry.
Which really brings up the ultimate so what for us as a species, I think.
How so?
Well, if love requires such incredibly complex, high-level narrative storytelling and massive brain power to process all these abstract concepts,
Yeah.
why did evolution push us in this highly vulnerable direction in the first place?
Ah, the evolutionary puzzle.
Right, because carrying around this heavy biological machinery that makes us obsessive, love-struck poets doesn't seem like an obvious survival advantage out in the wild.
It doesn't, until you realize that our massive, energy-hungry brains are actually the exact reason we needed love to evolve in the first place.
Wait, really? The big brains caused the problem?
Yeah, there's a brutal evolutionary trade-off at the heart of human existence. Because human beings evolved to have these massive, incredibly complex brains, human babies have to be born in incredibly helpless neonatal states.
Oh, because of the physical size.
Exactly. If a human infant stayed in the womb until its brain was fully baked and capable of basic survival, the infant's head would literally be too large to fit through the birth canal.
The mothers wouldn't survive childbirth. So human babies are basically born unfinished. They are completely defenseless.
Far more helpless than our closest non-human primate relatives, like chimpanzees. A human infant cannot survive without intense, prolonged, exhausting mammalian care.
They are very needy.
Very. And to survive this extended period of extreme vulnerability, our species biologically required a mechanism so powerful that it would force exhausted adults to stick around.
Oh, wow.
To protect and nurture these demanding infants at the expense of their own comfort. That mechanism, that biological duct tape holding the early family unit together, is love.
That brings a completely different, almost terrifying weight to a, quote, Linstroth references from Elie Wiesel.
The novelist and Holocaust survivor.
Yes. Wiesel famously said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference.
A powerful statement.
It is. And when you look at it through this evolutionary lens, the tragedy of Wiesel's, quote, becomes literal biology. Indifference and neglect don't just cause sadness. They literally negate healthy human development.
Absolutely.
If early humans were indifferent to the crying offspring keeping them awake at night, the entire species would have died out immediately.
Love is not a luxury for humanity. It is our primary biological imperative. And the data backs up just how universally installed this hardware is.
What kind of data?
Linstroth cites biological anthropologist Helen Fisher, who wrote the book Why We Love. She conducted a massive cross-cultural survey looking at 166 different cultures and found clear evidence of romantic love in 88% of them.
So it is definitely not just a Western Shakespearean invention.
Not at all. And to prove it mechanically, she later put 2,500 individuals in fMRI machines to look at their active brain scans.
Wait, 2,500 people?
Yeah.
That is a massive sample size for an fMRI study.
It's staggering, and she found that across the board, regardless of culture or background, the brain regions we've been discussing, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the VTA, they all lit up in the exact same patterns when the subjects looked at photos of people they loved.
The biological machinery for love is just a universal operating system.
Exactly.
And it extends beyond just romantic partners or parents keeping their children alive. This evolutionary hardware scales up to protect entire communities, doesn't it?
It does. To show the evolutionary roots of this empathy, Linstroth brings in research from primatologist and neurologist Robert Sapolsky.
What did Sapolsky observe?
He observed non-human primates, specifically baboons, engaging in communal grooming. But they aren't just doing it to pick out bugs for hygiene. They do it out of active empathy. Sapolsky noted that if a lower-ranking male baboon is beaten up by a higher-ranking male for no apparent reason, the victim is subsequently communally groomed by the other baboons.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah. They are actively utilizing physical touch to lower his stress hormones and console him.
It's the evolutionary precursor to human compassion.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
And relating that primate grooming to everyday human empathy is just so easy. Like, think about when you see a coworker having a terrible day.
Yeah.
Maybe they just got chewed out by the boss in a meeting, and you bring them a cup of coffee without them asking.
You aren't doing it to mate with them.
Right. And they aren't your infant child. You are doing it to console them. It really shows that love, in its broadest, most empathetic sense, is an everyday survival tool. It's the glue holding the entire tribe together.
And that really synthesizes everything we've explored today. Those reward systems, the VTA firing off dopamine, the oxytocin lowering our fear, they evolved not just to make us procreate.
They evolved to force us to empathize.
To compel us to care for our intensely needy infants and to ensure we protect our fragile communities. When you feel compassion for a stranger, or when an artist pours their soul into a painting, hoping to move an audience to tears, they're utilizing the species' ultimate survival strategy.
So to briefly recap the immense journey we've just taken on this deep dive,
It's been a ride.
we trace the concept of love from the raw mechanical hormones of lust and attraction straight into the physical structures of the brain, the VTA and the amygdala that govern both romance and artistic genius.
Yeah.
We explored how human narrative and the prefrontal cortex allow us to hack those chemicals, elevating them into abstract philosophies like divine love.
Incredible stuff.
And finally, we grounded it all in evolutionary biology, realizing that our immense capacity for empathy is basically the only reason our big brain species survived its own infancy.
The intellect that makes us uniquely human absolutely required a biological safety net of intense emotional connection just to exist.
So for you listening, remember this. The next time you feel deeply passionate about a topic, whether you are excitedly prepping for a big meeting, or you are completely devoured by reading new research, or you are lost in a flow state on a creative project.
You aren't just working.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're utilizing the exact same biological machinery, the exact same chemical cascades that allow humanity to care for one another. You are operating the engine of love.
The line between what we feel and what we create is an illusion.
It really is. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
A little homework.
Right. We've established today that our immense capacity for love, empathy, and connection evolved primarily because our huge brains made us physically helpless as infants. We needed each other to survive a brutal natural world.
Yes.
But look at the world we are building right now. How might human evolution in the future, perhaps in an era where artificial intelligence and technology make our daily lives physically effortless, where survival no longer requires that intense communal struggle?
Where things are easy.
Right. How might that fundamentally rewire the biology of how we love? If we don't need the duct tape of oxytocin and dopamine to ensure our sheer survival in the same way, what will our biology do with all that unspent passion? Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.